Hey guys, what's up? I just wanted to make a quick video here. Maybe quick, not too sure. But anyways, I want to talk about a couple of tech cards um, for modern if you're playing the color white, and especially if you're playing blue-white control or some sort of variant of blue-white control. Now, this card has kind of flown under the radar for me for a while, and after discussing some tech cards with my friends um, and whatnot, we kind of brainstormed some ideas, and I'm definitely not like the first to play this card or anything like that. But I thought I had some interesting um, interactions with the current format, and it seems to be a pretty powerful card, and it's a great card to side in. Especially, I don't know about main boarding, but you could definitely main board it. And there's, as you can kind of see on the top of my screen here, you can kind of already see the cards that I'm going to potentially talk about here. Um, and yeah, so if you watched my video today or a couple days ago, I talked about my local experience or Modern Monday experience, and I lost to a uh, Indomitable Creativity deck, and it was kind of a blowout match against me. I couldn't really do anything to kind of stop the Archons of Cruelty from coming into the battlefield. And we had counterspell wars and stuff like that, and I was just didn't quite have the resources, didn't quite have the cards I needed to stop the combo from happening. Um, and that could just be based on the draw and luck and other stuff like that. And it's probably since it's my first time playing against them, I probably did misplay. Now, my side deck wasn't really ever created to fight against those type of decks, because I thought my main board, having a bunch of counter spells should be good enough to stop them. But like Cascade decks, they also play counter spells to protect their combo. They play other interactions, stuff like that. So it definitely is a little bit harder to play against them, and especially since their curve is relatively small or lower than my curve, they can typically win out the counterspell war fairly easily, or they just get enough resources to do so. But yeah, let's talk about some potential side cards that I can add in, and let's talk about the first card here, which I think is kind of an interesting card. Um, I didn't really know it existed until like I was talking with my friends. The other two cards here, as you can see, Containment Priest and Draenith Magistrate, are cards that have existed and I know of, and I didn't particularly care for them too much. But this card's a little different. It's it's basically like a Containment Priest in the form of an instant card. So if you don't know what Containment Priest does, she essentially would exile anything that would enter the battlefield that wasn't cast. So it's, reanimation um, is one way, or like polymorphing or cheating out something from your deck. Um, it doesn't stop invoke because invoke cards were they are casted for free, but they've still casted the invoked creature like Fury or Solitude. But it does stop stuff like creativity from kind of happening. Stops living end, stuff like that. So Octavian Priest is great in that sense. Like she's got flash, which means you can do it right when your opponent is about to cast a cascade card, like um, living end or something like that. Issue with Containment Priest is that it's a creature, so if it's still prone to removal. It is great in the sense that it's not prone to something like a spell pierce or a force of negation, and it's not weak to like mystical dispute. So those are some of the typical cards you may see when you play against like a creativity deck, or maybe a cascade deck. Those are some cards you might see. Obviously, Cascade's not gonna play Spell Pierce. They're gonna play Mystical Dispute, or they're gonna play Force of Negation. So your counter spells don't always work to counter the card that they're casting. This card works a little bit better because it's a creature. Neither Dispute works well, neither Force of Negation works well. But obviously, there are other decks out there that this card may still fall prey to if like they have like a way to remove it once it hits the battlefield. So say they had like a Brazen Borrower, or they had Bone Crusher Giant or a Bolt or something like that. So it's prone to removal, and but that's kind of like the trade off there, right? Um, and So, and it's obviously if it gets removed, you're losing out a card. But it's still an interesting card, right? No, the other real bad downside about this card is it doesn't hit tokens. So what this card does, Hollow Moonlight, basically what it does here, I'll just go ahead and read it. Until the end of the turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield, if it wasn't cast, exile it, draw a card. So what this does, I think it does. Obviously, it hits token creatures, so which means it hits stuff like Rhino decks. So if they're trying to um, cast their Rhino card, you cast this, they lose both their Rhinos, and you draw a card. So pretty cool, right? Um, Another thing this card is great against is it's can't be interacted with. The only way that you can interact with Hollow Moonlight is to either spell pierce it or force negation it. So in that sense, Moonlight is weak to those particular cards, but it's strong to like removal, and it's a card that um, I would say for the most part it's harder to interact with for most decks, especially if you're playing like Scam too. If you're playing Scam, this card there's no way for them to really interact with this particular card. Um, if they have a Containment Priest, they can remove Containment Priest with like a Bolt or a Fury or something like that. But with this particular card, they just can't interact with it at all outside of trying to grief you before you are able to cast this card. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the implications of what this might have for a control deck and what use it might have for it. But I'm gonna digress a little bit. I also thought about this card. This card is also pretty interesting. The Draenei Magistrate is kind of interesting. Like it stops Cascade cards and stuff like that. But it doesn't stop the cards that cheat them out. It doesn't stop reanimation and it doesn't really stop polymorphing or creativity. So I thought it was cool. I saw this used against my friend. He was playing Living End, and his opponent dropped a Draenei Magistrate on him, and he just like, oh shit, there's really no way for him to kill this other than with like a Brazen Borrower or some sort of way to bounce it back. Um, my friend was also playing Dead Gone, and this is a 1/3, so Dead Gone does not really get rid of this either. So it's an interesting tech card that you could potentially add in if you ever wanted to try it out. But yeah, the card I want to focus on is Hollow Moonlight. So in the shell, like my deck right here, where I got like your basic kind of control, I don't think I'd be main decking it. It is main deckable because it's a 2 mana cycler, which is kind of great. But I thought it fit more into my side deck at the moment. So I'm decided to try out 2 copies of the Hollow Moonlight, and I decided to down out on all of the spell bombs down here, because it kind of serves the same purpose in a sense. So spell bomb for me was like it's essentially 2 mana, right? You crack it, you exile your opponent's graveyard, you draw a card. Cool. So it cycles itself, it replaces itself, and exiles their graveyard. This card essentially does the same thing, but it doesn't really care about the graveyard as much. So you can keep this in your hand as long as you want. Where if you play a spell bomb, you give your opponent an opportunity to out it. So if they draw something like an artifact hate card, they draw a Stony Silence, they use Foundation Breaker, Force of Vigor, um, or Boseiju, for example. There's ways for them to get rid of your spell bomb before it becomes useful. So that, from my experience, that sometimes is the case. Where something like a Hollow Moonlight, there's no way for them to interact it. They can side in all the artifact hate and stuff like that, but that's not going to do anything good against this particular card. So, um, its uses uh, in our control matchup are going to typically be against um, Cascade decks. So let's talk about Rhino, Glimpse of Tomorrow, and Living End. So all 3 of them are the popular Cascade decks. Sometimes you see a card that plays like Blood Raid Elf or something like that. That doesn't really matter too much. Um, but yeah, so what this does against them is if they play, you let them cast. Let's say they play Charlotte's Agent, right? And they go through their deck, they attempt to cast Living End or one of the three Cascade cards, Living End, Glimpse of Tomorrow, and Crashing Footfalls or whatever. I forget the name of the card, but yeah, they cast that, and then you respond with this card. You respond, you go Moonlight, um, Hollow Moonlight. So now they are forced to bring out those creatures. They're forced to bring out their entire graveyard. They're forced to bring out the rhinos, or they're forced to shuffle all their permanents onto their if they're playing Glimpse, they're forced to shuffle all their permanents and then just bring out X permanents, right? So what this does is it gets rid of essentially everything that would be brought out with um, Living End. So if they had like maybe, for example, they had like two griefs in the graveyard or something, and they Living End try to bring back the griefs. What this would do is it's like a replacement effect. If I understand this card correctly. So what happens is the card just gets exiled. It never actually enters the battlefield, so they don't even get the trigger off of the grief, which is kind of cool. So they just get immediately exiled, which is great. Same thing with the rhinos. This works against rhino because it says a creature. So if they get two 4/4 rhinos, those get exiled. Glimpse of Tomorrow, if they draw a bunch of creatures, they're basically just they lose the game immediately. If they get a bunch of like lands, okay, cool, whatever. The cool thing about the card is that you still get a card back. So even if this card whiffs, even if the Hollow Moonlight whiffs, or something like that, or it doesn't do a lot, it still gets you a card back, which is nice. So that's a cool thing about that. Also, in my particular deck, I also play Snapcaster. So this, I can just have this in my graveyard, Snapcaster, grab this back, and basically just lock my opponent's turn down for the turn or whatever. And the one thing I do like about the Hollow Moonlight is it goes under Veil of Summers. So this card is like the worst nightmare for blue white control. It's like 1 mana, you can't counter their stuff, blah blah blah. This card is great for that. Like you just cast it, and if they have a bunch of Veils of Summer, it doesn't matter. Like this card will resolve. Their stuff will still get exiled. Um, and they don't even draw a card. I think this only draws a card off of blue and black. So yeah, that it's kind of a card that's like it's interesting. Like you just don't see it, and you don't see it coming, and it kind of wrecks their board there. Another cool thing about this is it also works against scam decks. So assuming you don't get first turn scam, if they scam you, if you go first, or maybe second or something, there's a high probability that they may not have that combo first immediately. If they do, then it's unfortunate. But um, what this does is, let's say you have 2 mana up, and they decide to go Fury, and then try to revive it. Like they invoke the Fury, try to revive it or whatever. So they invoke the Fury. What you do then is you just cast this on top of it. So that's fine. The Fury still hits the board, and then it sacrifices itself to its own effect. And if they try to, you know, put like a rebirth on it or something, then if the rebirth does bring it back, it just gets exiled. Same thing with the grief. So you could potentially net yourself minus your opponent 2 cards and have another card in their hand dead. So against like the scam type of decks, this card can be pretty busted. Um, and that seems to be like um, obviously if this card was 1 mana, it'd be even more busted. But 2 mana is what we're gonna have to work with. So yeah, it works well against scams, all the Cascade decks. Creativity, same thing. If they try to creativity, go ahead and let them cast and um, the creativity, then just cast this card in response to it, and whatever permanents they sack, and they try to bring out 3 Archons. All 3 Archons get exiled, and they draw nothing. They don't heal anything because the Archon never enters the battlefield, and you draw a card. So they lose a bunch of permanents, a bunch of crabs and treasures, and you lose essentially nothing. And their best way to counter this is either with like a spell pierce maybe, or a force of negation. Um, Other than that, their veil and whatnot doesn't do anything against this card. So that's a cool thing. So I definitely think this card may have a place in a lot of blue-white control decks, or even if you're just playing white of any kind, even if you're not a control deck. I think this card has the potential to be a good side card, namely because it's just super generic. Like the conditions for it are just great, like, and it just draws you a card. Like it's a two-mana cycler with a pretty good effect to shut down your opponent's game plan without any essentially any cost to you really. Um, and yeah, it seems like it's. I would say it's gonna be a card that you might want to play two to three of in your side deck. Maybe I might. I'm debating to bump it up to three. Honestly, I might take out like a Kai's Gaio or something else because it kind of also works as graveyard hate because a lot of graveyard stuff that reanimates this card. You just respond to that and basically whatever they bring back from the graveyard just gets exiled anyways. So they can put all that effort into dumping stuff into the graveyard and then you moonlight it, and then they just if they're trying to reanimate something, you moonlight it, and then they kind of lose the game from there. Now, obviously, it doesn't stop dredge or something like that. If they're dredging and they're adding stuff back to their hand, then obviously this doesn't do that, doesn't stop that, unless they're dredging something to bring a creature back to the battlefield. But yeah, dredge is basically dead. I wouldn't worry about dredge at all. Um, Now it may not work against like breach, breach deck or something like that. You still probably need, some sort of graveyard hate for a breach, through the breach. Sorry there, through the breach sort of decks. This card doesn't work against that. This card also works against something like Arc like Phoenix. If they play three spells and they attempt to go to battle phase and trigger all three of the Phoenixes in the graveyard or something like that, you cast the Hall Light, the Moonlight card, and the Phoenix come onto board, or they just, well, they don't come on the board, they just get exiled. So, um, pretty cool there. And yeah, it seems like I don't know how this card flew on the radar for so long, but if you're playing white, I would pick up a couple. I think I was trying to pick up foils for this card, and it already jumped up to $25, and it was kind of blowing up at the beginning of this month. So, yeah, if you get a chance to pick up a couple of copies while they're still cheap, pick up, two to three, maybe two to four copies. I think it's a great card. If not, Containment Priest, if you're playing a creature deck or you're playing some sort of like human deck or something like that, obviously Containment Priest might be better. It might synergize with your deck a little bit better. For me, I don't really have any synergy with Containment Priest other than it being a 2/2 body. So I think I think this card is better for my control deck, especially since I'm playing Snapcaster. I can recycle it, so that's pretty good. And it works pretty well with like with Chalice the Void too, because with Spell Bomb I had to draw the Spell Bomb first before I cast the Chalice, but with this I can just play it with the Chalice on one or zero depending, and still have my deck essentially operate like normal. And it's great as a cantrip card too, so serves that purpose. But yeah, I think this is gonna be a card I'm gonna test out the next couple weeks. I'm gonna be busy the next upcoming week or so, and so I won't be playing modern much. And I still have a couple cards coming in. Still trying to buy up some of the Galaxy lands, and they're just really pricey right now. And so those are it's kind of hard to come by. Since I sold off some of my Ravnica lands, my deck is kind of not functional at the moment. Yeah, anyways, I think that's it. Hopefully this wasn't too long, and I'll see you guys next time.